Episode number 19 with John Williams. Welcome to In It to Win It. This is Stevie B, and Dan G is off on a real estate venture. He won't be joining us today, so today it's just you and me and Mr. Williams. Daniel's getting his real estate license, and if it goes in line with our plan of a crashing housing market, that's going to come in quite handy for him and I. So I appreciate him doing that. Thank you, Daniel. This week we have John Williams of shadowstats.com is his website. And what John has done is pretty interesting. The government reports statistics. They report CPI, unemployment, GDP, the money supply, and the dollar index. And they've been adjusting things like these statistics over the years. And John has become an expert in finding the real numbers and not calculating in those adjustments that they have made to give us the real numbers, the real math. So very interesting interview. He's probably forgotten more about economics than I'll ever know, and it was a lot of fun to have him on. I hope to have him on in the future. Let's see. Oh, Daniel and I ordered from Miles Franklin from Andy Scheckman. Very easy, just over the phone. Sent him an email, and with the order amount, we sent him a check. Once your check and account is in the system, after that, all it takes is a phone call. So pretty cool. Once the check clears, they got to wait 10 days, and then after that, they ship you off your precious metals. So that should be arriving shortly, and we can tell you how that process is. If you'd like to secure yourself some physical precious metals, go to milesfranklin.com, give them a call over the phone number, send them an email, and they'll give you their inventory list. There's some of the best prices that I've seen, and if you put in the email or tell them over the phone that you heard it on In It to Win It, Andy will give a little kickback to the show. It doesn't cost you an extra dime. And you get to give back to your favorite show and keep this train running. I also want to give a shout out to a video series that I've watched. I think I'm on the third time of watching it. It is an amazing video system on the world economic system and the monetary system. It's by Mike Maloney. If you go onto YouTube and you just type in Hidden Secrets of Money, he's got maybe 10 videos on there, each about half an hour or so in length, and he describes the history of the monetary system, and it really gives you a good picture of where we are today and how to prepare for it. I think that at least for Daniel and I, this is just an educational show, and probably one of the best things you can do is invest in your education, especially at this unique time where we are in history. You can only take the hand that you're dealt, and this hand that we're dealt, I think the interview that we have coming up with John and what you'll learn in that video series of Hidden Secrets of Money, I believe will better prepare you for the future. So, without further ado, John Williams. John Williams, thank you for coming on the show.
Steve, thank you so much for having me.
Yes. I only recently heard of you. Well, we had Andy Scheckman on the show last week, and one of his suggestions was, he said, you really got to talk to Mr. Williams. And, it's like when you hear one thing, you start hearing it over and over, and I've been watching a bunch of Mike Maloney's videos, and you were mentioned back in videos all the way to 2011. So I thought this guy is quite the rock star in the financial and economy world, and I just really wanted to have you on the show. So um, I was hoping you could give maybe a 2 minute bio on how you got into economics and what brought you to shadow stats and just going through the numbers and coming up with the real ones today.
Sure. Um, I went to Dartmouth College in the Amos Tuck Business School. Uh, I was looking to go into business with my father, the company that imported chainsaws from Germany, and I did. I completed both my education and went into the family business. I majored in economics at Dartmouth and did a lot of econometric modeling at Tuck, and I could see all sorts of ways of reporting the economy and estimating it that were not being pursued. The family business eventually sold out to the manufacturer in Germany. I was involved in currency trading and other things there, all of which was good practical knowledge.
Oh
And at
yeah.
that point, I looked to combine the various things I'd been working on into a package that would provide me with a solid consulting base as an economist. I hired a brilliant mathematician out of one of the largest computer companies, did a lot of modeling there, worked together, and we developed some unique econometric models aimed at forecasting the economy into the future. Now, all an econometric model does is it takes uh, various variables that you think might affect the economy, let's say income versus retail sales, and you combine them in a way that you take actual income numbers and retail sales in the future, presumably with a leading relationship, um, that you can then predict it. There are big grand scale models of the economy out there, and you could predict 2 to 3 years out in the future. The only problem with those models, the only problem is you don't have that kind of a lead time with hard numbers. If I wanted to use one of those models to predict inflation rates next year, I'd first have to plug in what's the inflation rate going to be next year. And I can tell you if I knew what the inflation rate was going to be next year, I didn't need the model to tell me where the inflation rates were going. So what we did was we created some unique models based solely on actual numbers, leading indicators as to where things were going. And with that, we could predict things 6 to 9 months into the future with some degree of accuracy. And it worked well and sold well. The only problem was the government. This is back in the 70s,
That was
late,
going to
late,
be my question. When was this? Okay.
late 70s, early 80s. And then the government started changing the way they reported the numbers. They weren't consistent with the past, and that blows apart all sorts of things. And
Yes.
I
That
looked
was in
at,
1980 they started adjusting that
well,
or
in terms of the CPI, Consumer Price Index,
Mhm.
it was, they're talking about it early 80s, and it was 82, 80, it was 81, 82, 83 that things were discussed and actually implemented. And the idea, the whole concept behind this change was, and what you have to keep in mind is that up through this point in time, things have been reasonably stable and in the way things were reported. Inflation was beginning to pick up, and that meant the federal government had to increase the cost of living payments on Social Security. So they tried to find ways they could bring down the reported cost of living that got plugged into the equation there. And what they did, and this was the first big change, was they changed the housing component of the consumer price index, the consumer inflation
Okay.
part of it. Um, it had the original component had included something as crazy as the cost of buying a new house. And that was just a portion of it because not everyone's buying a new house each month, but buying a house is an element. And then you had uh, rents and all sorts of things. What they changed was they eliminated all of that and replaced it with a concept called homeowners equivalent rent. and that was where the government would determine what an average homeowner would pay himself in rent to rent his own house,
Okay.
which had no basis in underlying reality. And it was the actual month-to-month inflation was calculated from the standpoint of how much the homeowner would then raise the rent on himself each month.
Okay.
The effect of the change was that it knocked 1.5 percentage point off the annual inflation rate. Just that one change. And
Okay.
put that in perspective, and given the headline inflation of not that where we are right now, but in 2020, I think the total annual inflation then was something like 1.3%. So if you added back in what they'd taken out with these gimmicks, you would have doubled the inflation rate last year. And it got worse. Over time, they came up with all sorts of ways of substituting things and shifting weightings around, people going from malls or from local stores to malls. The whole concept behind the CPI was the cost of maintaining a constant standard of living. And what they did was they removed the constant from that equation. I tracked it over time. I took great offense as to what was being done. It got real bad in the 90s. And anyone who wants to get some sense of what was being discussed, just do a quick Google search on Gingrich and CPI, and you find a whole list of articles. Newt Gingrich at the time was Speaker of the House, and he had he suggested to Catherine Abrams, who was then the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, gee, if you could only find a way to change these numbers here the way we'd like it, well, we might be able to find you some more money for you in the budget.
Huh.
It was all political, nothing legitimate in terms of giving people an average, an actual fair cost of living adjustment.
Nothing
So,
based in reality.
nothing based in reality. And the government's straightforward in terms of what they do here, just doesn't get much press. And they've shown all the changes they made. What I did was I just reverse engineered it. I lived through the times, but I reverse engineered it. What would the CPI look like if they hadn't done that?
Yeah.
And it's made a significant difference over time. If you look at I guess we just had the June CPI.
Yeah. Was it 5.4?
5.4%.
What they reported.
Had they not made all these redefinitions to the series, so there was no longer a constant standard of living, you'd have been up 13.4%.
Wow.
That's a significant difference. Now, my
Yeah.
number, the alternate right there, my number is a 41-year high. The headline number at 5.4% was a 13-year high, but guess what? It was only 0.2 of a point away from a 41-year high. We're real close from that standpoint. This is a very serious inflation circumstance.
Okay, so the government has a vested interest in not telling us 13.4 and instead telling us 5.4 because they have to do cost of living increases for things like Social Security, correct?
That's correct. That's the primary and the reason for that. It's not that they want to cheat the average person, which is what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
The motivation behind it is trying to contain the budget deficit, because the cost of living adjustments raise all the Social Security payments, and that increases the expenditures and the deficit. So if they can however they can keep it down, that will help the budget deficit. That's the motivation.
Okay. And what who decides and what the CPI is? Is it the Fed or?
No, it's actually determined by Congress, or it has been. And the calculations, they have economic consultants outside, and the Fed is no help here.
Okay.
But the Congress has put the pressure on the Bureau of Labor Statistics to change things, and they have done that over time. But at the time that Gingrich was making his points, then Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan came up with, he tried to argue the same way that, oh, they should change the numbers. It's to the Fed's advantage to have lower headline inflation. They're supposed to keep inflation low, and if the headline numbers are lower, it makes them look better.
Okay.
But here was his suggestion. And again, keep in mind the concept of a constant measure of a constant standard of living. What he suggested was, well, you have a substitution effect.
Yeah.
Let's say you like to eat steak, but steak gets too expensive. So you start buying chicken. And so we can substitute the chicken in there instead of the steak in the CPI. That is so contrary to the whole concept.
Yeah.
I fume every time I think about it, because what you're looking at, at least I mean, I'm sure there are people like prefer chicken to steak, but you could make it steak against hamburger, however you want to look at it. The point is, you're looking to maintain a constant standard of living, and if you're maintaining a constant standard of living, you don't have to shift from buying steak to buying chicken in order to make ends meet. That is not maintaining a constant standard of living. They
Yes.
violated the whole concept of the CPI as it was structured, so that when they went on Social Security, they could continue to buy steak and not have to eat chicken or whatever else they have to end up with, because it's all being substituted out in the CPI.
Yeah. So they're getting the cost of living increase. I don't know if this is it, but let's say they report 5.4. If they're getting $1,000 a month, now they're getting $1,054 a month instead of $1,134 a month if it was 13.4%. Right?
Something along those lines. I can tell
Okay.
you this: we're heading into it's a very dangerous time right now with rapidly surging inflation. As you went into this into June, we're still a little bit ahead in terms of time of the CPI. It's a CPIW that's used here for all urban workers for the third quarter, which will be used as a guide, which will be used as a determinant for Social Security cost of living adjustments, third quarter of this year.
Okay.
But as we stand as of June, you're up around 5.4%. That's probably going to be 8%, 9% in the third quarter. That will be the highest level in more than 40 years.
Now you're saying they'll report 8 or 9%, or you're saying that's what it'll actually be?
No, that's what they're going to report.
Okay.
We're in a very dangerous period here of surging inflation. And although that may sound good to the people who are on Social Security and such, that gets paid to you next year. And at that point, your cost of living may be up 25% year to year, maybe up 50% year to year. We're in a very serious inflation problem, very serious financial, economic inflation crisis right now because of the shutdown. And I mean, I'm going to talk critically of both the Fed and the federal government here.
Please
But
do.
in fairness, this is an extraordinary circumstance. Both entities have operated to try and maintain the system in a stable position. A very difficult circumstance. I don't know that there's an easy solution to it, but the general outcome here is going to be much higher inflation than people are looking at. And I think it's going to take a while for the economy to get back to close to where it was before.
I got into this probably 6 months ago, and since then I've been studying it anywhere from 2 to 8 hours a day. I just can't get enough of the economics of all of this. And okay, so if we could back up just one sec. Okay, you mentioned substitution is one way that they adjust the CPI. Is there? I've also heard there's weight and hedonic index. Can you go into those?
Well, it's somewhat similar. It's hedonic quality.
Okay.
I'll see if we can think of a good example.
I heard of an example of today's cell phones are much better than cell phones 10
Yeah.
years ago,
Okay.
and so
Well,
they
yeah,
something
my
like that.
friend, you got it right.
Okay.
That's exactly where it is. And I'll give you a very specific example for myself.
Okay.
I'm uh, I'm not a high tech guy. I use a computer as a word processor. Uh, I use it for emails.
Hmm.
I don't use it for accessing all the music and God knows whatever can be obtained. I'm using it the same way I did 20 years ago.
Okay.
Now, from that standpoint, that's that's my that's my quality. That's what I need. Uh, the done a quality adjustment though for every new thing that comes in, every new twist. They say, well, you're getting more for your buck on the computer, therefore we can reduce the computer prices in our index. And very simply, the computer I'm using right now cost me $1,100.
Hmm.
Uh, that that's about what I paid for the one before it some time ago.
Hmm.
Yet, according to the way the numbers are calculated by the government, it only cost me $50 because of all these wonderful hedonic quality adjustments that I don't use.
You're getting so much more enjoyment out of it.
Absolutely. Well, I'm getting to talk to you, but that probably is worth at least $500 out of
Oh,
the.
there you go. Yeah, that's half the cost right there. Uh, and okay, so that's hedonic quality. Would you say that weight and substitution are pretty much the same thing, or is that more they're substituting?
It's very close.
Okay.
But the thing is, you shouldn't shift the weight should stay constant,
Yeah.
effectively constant over time. Yes, the substitution. What do they do? Well, um, the again, they shift the people. They look at how people buy products, and maybe they're buying them one time. They're buying them from the small private stores, and then it shifts to
Costco type
the
places,
centers,
or
the big shopping centers. Now
okay.
that's somewhat hedonic as well. I mean, I'd much prefer to deal with the local store and many of the products I buy as opposed to fight the crowds out at the malls.
Yeah.
It's always been that way. But they keep moving it so that everybody's buying it out at the malls. And you get biases that are built in from all these factors in terms of the quality, the, uh, the ease, the style of life. It's not an easy factor, but it used to be. They just held it constant. They left their weights constant. And had they done that, you'd have my numbers,
Yeah.
which is what the average guy is feeling. And I can tell you from what I've seen with we're not seeing just problems with the reporting of the CPI. Directly related to that is some reporting qualities with the gross domestic product, the big measure of the economy.
With the GDP, can you give a quick for our average listener? Can you give a quick definition of what gross domestic product is?
Sure, that's the government's estimate of the total level of economic activity in the United States. They put a dollar value on it.
What we produce in a year, correct?
Basically, yes, and it's not just product, but services and intellectual properties. Um, and it's they come up with an estimate in what they call nominal terms, which is before you adjust it for inflation. The problem is when you adjust it for inflation, and this is a funny thing because um, all the CPI machinations here have the same effect, whether it's what you're paying in your or what you're receiving in terms of your Social Security check, uh, or when you look at the headline economic statistics. The way economic statistics usually are reported or reflected, they're not always reported that way, but they're reflected that way by economists, is net of inflation. I mean, for example, retail sales, uh, and I don't have the numbers right in front of me at the moment, but they were, let's say they were flat last month, but inflation was 2%. Then net of inflation, they would have been down 2%. But
Mm-hmm.
if that inflation number is overstated, was really down 5%, then real retail sales would have been down 5%.
Hmm.
That's nobody gets much into that, but where it comes to a head is with the gross domestic product, the broad measure of the economy,
Yeah.
and they've made all sorts of changes to the way they deflate, which means they take the inflation out of the numbers, and where the you've seen growth in the economy for well we've had aside from the collapse uh, where we had growth into that collapse and had the collapse, and now it's growing fairly strongly, but it has not recovered. There's some very major points to be made there, and some interesting things about to happen next week. Uh, the if you looked at it on a consistent inflation basis, the economy's never been that strong.
Hmm.
They keep the inflation used in the GDP is not dependent upon the CPI. The people who report the GDP, again, this is all out of the Census Bureau of Economic Analysis. They have their own ways of calculating inflation using things including the CPI. But they can do anything that they want. Their ways of shifting things around, and all the wonderful technical things that they've added to the CPI over time. Everything there is in there in the CPI, excuse me, in the GDP deflation to the extreme. I figure right now that the headline GDP in terms of year-to-year change is overstated by about 2 percentage points. And while that might not make too much difference when we're still in a crash, economic crash, although they're beginning to get close to a recovery there, and I'm saying it's still going to be a while off because of the way they report the numbers. In terms of the GDP, you go back over the last 10 years, average economic growth per the GDP has been about 2%. So what I'm saying is effectively the economy's been flat net of actual inflation.
Okay.
And there are a lot of things that show that, and it affects the political spectrum as well, because the average guy has a pretty good sense of what's actually happening to him. But we have some very interesting things ahead of us in the next week or so.
What do you see coming up in the next week or so?
Well, next on Friday, I don't know, it's Thursday or Friday. Thursday,
Okay,
July
the 29th?
July 29th. We get the annual benchmark revision to the gross domestic product.
Ah.
Well, that's the headline economic activity, and shy of the pandemic, it had been growing into the pandemic. No longer. I mean, that may still be the case, but it's not going to be as strong as it was. What you have to keep in mind is that each of these agencies, including the Federal Reserve, comes out with benchmark revisions each year on their major series as they get better data. And the Federal Reserve has been remiss in the last couple of years. They missed 2 years of benchmark revisions. They just came out with a benchmark revision, having missed 2 years before. So 3 years for benchmark revision. And what it did was it knocked 5 percentage points off the level of industrial production in its reporting as of April or May,
Huh.
and that's significant. And that's the industrial production is a significant portion of
Of GDP.
GDP. So that as the industrial production revises downward, GDP is going to be revised on Thursday. it will take it lower. There are
Yeah.
other factors involved, other obviously than industrial production, which is far from the dominant factor, but it's a major factor. But you're going to have downside revisions in housing. Uh, you're going to have a deeper trade deficit. You had some downside revisions in retail sales, payroll employment, where the economy coming into the pandemic was growing or marginally growing.
Mm-hmm.
It could, with all the revisions, there's a potential here that it could be revised lower to show that actually the economy peaked in late 2018 after the Fed started raising interest rates. And that's I think that's why they didn't come up with their benchmark revisions. uh, and as a result, if that's a peak in GDP and it starts to go lower, and maybe the GDP will just still flatten out, maybe at a little lower pace, but if that's the peak, the National Bureau of Economic Research, which in this last week declared recession's over, only 2 months of recession. Hallelujah. Everything they said there was accurate, except it's nonsense.
Smoke and mirrors.
No, it's not smoke and mirrors, but it's just smoke and mirrors. It goes back to after World War II. Let me tell you what happened there, and I'll bring it to where I think we're going. The Great Depression was a terrible time for anyone who lived through it.
Mm-hmm.
And before the Great Depression and before any time the economy contracted, which was considered a depression, the depression was defined. And keep in mind, this is a depression, which you come down and you come back up. The first part of it was a recession. You'd hit the trough, and then it would start to recover. And when it reached its pre-pandemic peak, or in this depression peak, then that was an economic expansion. And that's the way it used to be, and still is, except the first time we had a recession after World War II. Excuse me. Well, it was after World War II, after the Great Depression. The powers that be in the academic community decided it would be better to use a euphemism for depression. And they named it a recession, which is silly, because the recession is the negative part of the depression. The recovery is a positive part. You still have the economic cycle is still that depression. You have a recession and then you have a recovery. So with the economic collapse, the government shutdown of the economy, you could expect, things just shut down, boom, boom, and you had a tremendous drop, biggest drop ever, or at least post Great Depression in the economy on a year-over-year basis, as the economy was shut down. And then we've been inching higher. There have been some setbacks, but it's still well shy of recovery, despite what you might hear about the GDP, which we can talk about otherwise. So that you have, so the headlines are recession's over, boom, but the depression isn't. The depression is still ongoing. And as of the June reporting, and the best number I can give you at present, that without going through any gimmicks or shifts or adulterations, is payroll employment. There's nothing more basic to the economy than employment.
Yes. Now, on your site, shadowstats.com, you've got some graphs on here, and I'm looking at the one for the unemployment rate, and what the government's reporting looks to be about 6% or so. But what by your calculations, it looks like it's north of 26%. Is that accurate?
It's that's about right.
Okay.
And that's related, not specifically to what's happening here with the cycle, but what happened where they redefined elements of the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, and inflation to understate it. The government launched revisions to how they counted unemployment just before NAFTA went into effect.
The North American Free Trade Agreement. Can you just describe what NAFTA is real quick?
Yeah, it was a North American Free Trade Agreement, which reduced all sorts of trade barriers and inter-country fees and penalties or service, what they call them
For imports and exports and
for imports. There were the import charges and such.
okay.
And the effect there was to basically eliminate them, and as a result, you'd see some shifting of trade production from the United States to Canada and also to Mexico, which happened. But the effect there was not good for the U.S. economy. It was not good for not for the U.S. economy as measured by people who were employed in the U.S. economy.
Yeah.
And the effect, very simply, was that the average guy suffered, and they knew he was going to suffer. Where that suffering had been measured before in the pre-NAFTA was in you have more than just the headline unemployment, which is called U3. That's just simply the number of people who are unemployed but actively looking for work. You have to be actively looking for work as a percent of the labor force, and the labor force was considered those who were unemployed plus those who were employed and those who were unemployed.
Okay. Yeah, you're the 6% and you're 26. That is a huge gap. What?
Well, bear with me.
Okay.
The next level is what they call U6, which includes discouraged workers, people who've been trying to find a job. Keep in mind, to be counted as unemployed, you have to be actively looking for work. Now, if you've been actively looking for work and you can't find a job and you give up looking for work, in U6 you're still counted as unemployed, but you're only counted if you've been looking for work in the last year.
Okay.
What used to be, prior to the redefinitions, you were counted as a discouraged worker as long as you were looking for work, or you wanted to work but couldn't find a job because there were no jobs to be had, and if you were discouraged for more than a year, didn't make any difference as long as you were looking. You wanted work but you couldn't find it. There's no work available.
Yeah.
And that was a big difference, because what they did when they changed over to NAFTA, they redefined the discouraged worker to be discouraged only for 1 year.
Okay.
And after 1 year, you're no longer discouraged.
That's why your graph. Okay, I understand. You're accounting for the people that have been unemployed for than a year.
Those are the people who are just more discouraged for more than a year because there are no jobs to be had.
Yeah. Okay.
Big difference.
But that drops off after 12 months' time in the government's formula.
You're eliminated.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, they don't count you anymore.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot more people that are not working than what we're led to believe.
That's correct. These are people who would like to work, but there are no jobs to be had.
Okay. I want to go over and kind of tie this in and tell me if this tracks with you. I've been doing some research on the world monetary system over the last 150 years. Mm-hmm. And the first one that we were on was the classical gold standard, where you could take paper currency and go to the bank, and if it said $20 on it, you could get a $20 gold piece.
Right.
And we went away from that around 1914 after World War I, when war isn't cheap, and we printed more than we had. And then we went to the gold exchange standard, where it was a 40% ratio. And so you would have to take a $100 paper currency into the bank to retrieve $40 worth of gold piece. Then after World War II, again we ran up the credit card, and wars are not cheap, and we had to switch over to the Bretton Woods system because America had 2/3 of the gold after the war. Europe had none, and the rest of the world had to split the remaining third. And we realized the current monetary system wasn't going to work, so they went to the Bretton Woods system. And now every currency on the planet, except for a few, were now backed by the U.S. dollar, which was backed by $35 per ounce. The problem with this system was there was no reserve ratio. And so they didn't say when they wrote into this that, for every 35 USD in existence, you have to have 1 ounce of gold. So they continued to print, and countries caught on to this, and they demanded gold instead of US dollars. And Nixon realized that this wasn't going to work, or America was going to soon be out of all its gold. So he went to the global dollar standard, where now all the currencies on the planet are backed by the US dollar, which is backed by nothing. And this happened August 15th of 1971. So we're coming up on the 50-year anniversary of the whole world being on fake money. Is this tracking, John?
Yeah, that you're absolutely correct, and I thank you for pointing out the coming anniversary.
Okay.
I had not thought of that.
Yeah, get your party hat ready.
Yeah, well, it's this is almost a terrible climax to that as a happy birthday present.
Yes.
Abandoning gold. What you see now? What happened there with Nixon triggered everything else that followed that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
If you look at the 1970 or 71, it goes off the gold standard.
Yeah.
At that point, up through that point in time, and I've tracked inflation over time and historical records and other people's estimates of it. And basically, up through 1971, the gold and the dollar, I mean, you always have some variations. They tracked each other. The gold and the dollar were tied together. I mean, the inflation rate and in the dollar and gold were tied together. You would whatever happened with inflation also happened with gold. So the dollar was stable against gold as long as it was in that circumstance, and inflation remained stable generally over that period of time.
Okay, so when we're on the gold standard, gold typically follows inflation, and when we're off the gold standard, inflation goes much faster.
When we're off the gold standard, inflation is created by the dollars. That's about what I'm about to get to here.
Okay.
Because what happened, as what I did when they started changing the CPI, that was in the early 80s. Nixon goes off in 71. As you get into the early 80s, gold continued to rise because of domestic inflation. Gold reflects the inflation.
Yeah.
It's your basic standard over time as to maintaining a constant value of the dollar. So when we got into the early 80s, what they said, oh, we can't afford to pay out these adjustments on the cost of living adjustments. Let's cut them back. And they made changes there, and they made changes left and right with all the other areas you mentioned going down the road. Well, if I take what I took in estimating my index after that first change in the CPI, and it's based on what the government estimated as to their changes. I ended up with a new index that was a lot higher, and it's only the last couple of years that I actually plotted that against gold. And to my shock, my graph and gold were very closely intertwined over time.
Interesting.
And it's I couldn't understand that. What happened was when I created my index, I based it in 1971, which effectively is 100 or so. It's very close to the gold price at the time in terms of the scale we're looking at here. And so my index is ahead with all the stuff that had been done to the CPI, and I've got it up over 1900 right now. That's my index. If you look at the year-end gold prices, which is what it plotted against that, they pretty much went up together and tracked. The gold tended to lead the inflation. And I mean, right now my index is at 1900. Gold's below that, but
pretty damn close.
What my point is, it is the gold follows. Excuse me. It leads the inflation. It anticipates the inflation. The people investing in gold have a sense of where things are going, and it's amazing. I mean, I knew that basically happened, but I didn't know it was so close until I actually plotted them together. And you look at what's happening now. The gold markets get manipulated quite a bit over time. Different parties come in and they'll hit it there, hit it there. It's nobody likes to see. If you're a central banker, the last thing you want to see is a surging gold price because you're not doing your job.
Yeah.
And right now, and due deference to all the difficulties that are involved, it's a very difficult time for a central banker. I wouldn't want to be the Fed chairman at present, because you've been faced with a catastrophe. Yeah. And there's no easy way out of it. I don't see an easy way out of it. They're doing what they have to do. They want to keep the system afloat. They've decided in order to do that, they have to surge the money supply. Right now, let me back off. As part of the process here, as they started to surge the money supply, the headline M1, which was then the narrowest measure of the money supply, was surging up 60-70% year over year. Nothing like that had ever been seen before. That was all being reported on a weekly basis. So what did they do? Well, they decided they'd shut down the reporting of M1, and instead of having it weekly, it'd be monthly, delayed by a month. And then they redefined M1 to add in M1 is your most liquid measure of the money supply. It includes cash and checking accounts, basically.
Okay, it's currency in circulation, and then checking accounts in banks, correct?
Checking accounts and other checkable accounts.
Okay.
But what they did was, and where that broke with M2, which was now their broadest measure, was that M2 was savings accounts.
Okay.
So the savings accounts being a little less liquid than the checking accounts.
Things like money market, mutual funds, CDs, stuff like that are now included?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what they did, so they said, what they did is they redefined M1. And they said, well, we eliminated reserve requirements back in May of 2010 as part of their emergency procedures, which effectively makes savings accounts as liquid as the demand deposits, a checking account, and M1. And at that point in time, M2 was where M1 was up, let's say 50-60%, the M2 was up 20-30%. There's been a flight to liquidity. I also continue to estimate M3, which they haven't published in 15 years or so, and that was maybe it was a little bit below M2 in year-to-year growth. So what happens?
Yeah, they stopped reporting that in like 2006 or something, right?
2006, yes.
Okay.
But what you find happening was that the cash was flowing from the less liquid assets, which the broader the money measure, the less liquid, to the more liquid. Most liquid being M1. So by delaying it, you wouldn't see the rapid growth, and they then redefined it effectively as M2. They moved the savings accounts into M1, so that where M1 was maybe 18% of M2 before the redefinition. After the fact, it's 92%. So M1 is effectively M2 these days. What I came up with, because what's happening with the real liquid cash is important. And so I'm reporting what I call basic M1, which simply is cash, the currency in circulation, and the time deposit, the checking accounts, demand deposits,
Okay.
which are the two major components of M1. What I can't report are the other uh, demand like deposits that they had there because they've merged that with the savings accounts in the M1 measure. But my basic M1 not only is 83% of the old M1, it also was the original definition of the money supply back in 1948, and that was your money supply measure for 1971. And right now, that's up over 80% year over year.
Wow.
That's unprecedented. But that's as of May. We're going to get June reporting next week. But the one thing they have not shut off, and maybe I shouldn't talk about it because it'd be terrible if they did shut it off, is the weekly reporting of the monetary base, which underlies the money supply. And this comes out weekly.
That's an important stat for you.
Yeah, well, it gives you the currency in circulation and bank reserves. And the bank reserves, they rise when there's a problem in the quality of the banking system. They have to back up the banks. You had a banking crash in in the Great Recession. The banks collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
The Fed supported them, but you saw these reserves jump by 4 or 5,000% year over year. They never
Wow.
came back down. Now we're up on a cycle basis, up record levels of 140%. It's getting worse, which means there's still some problems in the banking system. It's at record high levels. The currency in circulation year to year is at a record level, keeps growing, and the what it tells you is the system is not stable.
Yeah.
And where those reserves are still surging, although on a relative basis it's not as bad as it was back in the banking crash. It's at a troubling level.
Yeah. Okay. So on our so the research I've done, every single currency in history has eventually failed. They all do. You can't take continental dollars from the infancy of this country and go into Walmart and spend them today. Um, it and From what I can tell, when these currencies fail, for example, the U.S. dollar is a currency, the Mexican peso is a currency, the whole world's on fiat fake currency now. When these fail, precious metals, specifically gold and silver, kind of do an accounting to balance the books. Is that accurate?
Yes, however you want to measure them, um, they maintain the purchasing power of the currency, of whatever currencies in place or whatever had preceded it. Uh, you can go back to ancient Rome and whatever amount of gold or silver and I'm including both gold and silver here,
Mm-hmm.
whatever you need in the way of whatever amount of gold or silver would buy you a loaf of bread, that would buy you a loaf of bread today.
Yeah.
I was talking at a monetary conference a couple of years ago in New York, and the fellow there was groaning how his mother had, as a little girl, had so enjoyed going to Broadway shows, and her family was able to buy her a seat in a third row center, which I think is considered the prime seat in a Broadway house,
Okay.
and it cost them $5. And my response very simply was, well, she still had that $5 gold piece. She could buy a third row center Broadway seat today.
She could still get the same seat.
Same seat, same seat. It preserves the purchasing power of whatever currency is involved. It was the original currency that's survived over millennia.
Thousands of years. Yeah.
What can I tell you? So
Okay.
it's with all that's going on here, my suggestion to anyone is, irrespective of whatever the price of gold is at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
put some assets into physical gold. I'm talking physical. Don't leave it on deposit with someone, or
You're not talking about GLD on the stock exchange.
right.
Yeah.
I'm talking about buying some gold coins and putting them in your pocket, or in a drawer. I knew a guy who actually built a safe in his sofa and filled it with gold coins.
Hmm.
The point is, if you have the physical possession, you can control it. And I'm not talking just the gold coins, but the silver coins. What I'm looking at here is an extraordinary circumstance. Everyone knows we're living through an extraordinary circumstance.
Yeah.
No one's ever seen anything quite like this before. But I do know how gold and silver behave over time, and I can tell you that with what the Fed is doing today in terms of extraordinary money supply growth, and they can't cut back because they're afraid of a systemic collapse, which is a real risk.
Yeah.
You're going to keep doing it, and you're going to see inflation continue to soar, and the people are beginning to note it. The price is really rising here. Yeah. Uh, if
Yeah.
you can if you can get some physical gold, physical silver, and just hold
Okay.
it yourself, uh,
Okay.
that will save you in the event of a absolute economic catastrophe here, which I view as a possibility, and probably an increasing one the more you see the inflation surge. It's a very difficult time. I have great sympathy for the people in Washington who are trying to work this out, because it's despite all the mistakes made in the past, you have to live with what's here. That's a very difficult circumstance, because the economy is not as strong as advertised. Uh, it's not going to recover as quickly as advertised, and the inflation, despite Fed's claims that it's going to be temporary, until they can get to a point they can really shrink the money supply, it's not going to be temporary, and they have no prospects of such a circumstance in the near future.
Yeah. It taking a macroeconomic look. So, a quick macro is a big view. Micro, think of it looking under a microscope, kind of a pinpoint view. So, a big look view of the economy. What I hear you saying is the longer the government does things like paying people not to work, the faster the system is going to be in trouble and fail, and the quicker the wealth transfer is going to take place. Um, but when times like this happen, although they are rare events, um, you can maintain your standard of living or even increase it significantly by investing in physical precious metals. And this is a unique time in history, is that the whole planet is on the fake currency system. We're probably the most fortunate in that a lot of currencies are based on ours, so we'll probably be the last man standing, so to speak. But from what I can gather, this seems like this is a very unique time in history, in that many of these currencies have failed, gone. People were able to put their currency into gold and silver, and then transfer it over to whatever the new monetary system is. But the entire world is on a fake fiat currency, and we've never seen anything like this. And we probably won't ever see an opportunity like this in our lifetime.
Well, a lot of what you say I agree with. It's an extraordinarily difficult time. Uh, I don't know that there's too much different, that given all the problems that led into the financial system coming into the crash. I mean, had people rearranged things a decade or two ago, we could be in a better circumstance. Given where we were when the pandemic hit, uh, the the Fed, the government have done whatever they had to do to keep things afloat, and they're going to, as I read them, they certainly will continue to do so,
Mhm.
which means more fiscal stimulus out of the federal government and a continued monetary growth out of the Fed, despite whatever they talk about. They'll throw out occasional bits. Oh, maybe we're going to start tightening up a little bit in 2 years. And we've got a Fed meeting coming up next week, which I'm sure there'll be something like that, and maybe that'll make people feel a little better. But that's 2 years into the future. What they're doing right now is expanding as they have to. The federal government's going to have to continue politically spending as it is, or you have an economic collapse and terrible uh, political repercussions. I hope that we can avoid the economic collapse. I'm not sure that we can. I think it's they're buying time. They're hoping something will work here. Um, we're catching up on something that has been in the works for many years, accelerated by the pandemic.
Yeah.
Uh, and I just hope things can balance out over time and stabilize, and that things can be brought down. You don't have the inflation. But personally, I'd like to protect my assets and put whatever cash I didn't need immediately, and to try uh, and to physical, meaning physically owning
Yeah.
gold, some silver, because we have a hyperinflation. They both will tend to preserve your purchasing power. But I've talked with people who lived through the hyperinflation in Weimar Germany, and some of their children. Um, I'm both, overlapping of ages, and I'm getting on a little bit in my years. Um, there's some lessons from that, and the what happened when it broke was very rapid. It's almost overnight,
Hmm.
um, and we're moving in that direction. And people are beginning to complain about the higher prices. It's going to get worse in the months ahead, but at some point, it accelerates, and and your money becomes worthless. You have the physical solid assets, and there are other assets other than gold and silver, but those are the primary financial ones. An example I got from one guy was his father had this during the Weimar Republic inflation after World War One.
Hmm.
Uh, he had traded a shirt for a can of beans, and he brought the can of beans home for dinner for his family. They opened
Hmm.
the can of beans, and the can of beans had gone bad.
Hmm.
Uh, nothing's perfect there,
Yeah.
but you people will find a way to survive. But if you have assets now that you can preserve and that can help you through a difficult time, I would certainly look to do that.
Yeah. It what percentage would you say of your net worth you should have invested in physical gold, and what percentage of your net worth would you say you should have invested in physical silver?
Well, that varies by person.
Yeah, yeah. I understand some people have higher risk tolerances than others,
You,
but
you, you, you want to have enough invested to survive for a year if you can.
okay,
That,
okay.
that when you judge that accordingly. You need silver along with the gold, and the reason for that is as follows. Um, Given that barter example I just gave, the guy trades his shirt for a can of beans. You go in with even a half-ounce gold coin and say, "I want to buy that steak." You're overpaying for it in this type of circumstance. So if I would look for the basic preservation of wealth to be in gold, but you also need some silver, let's say bags of silver coins. I
Hmm.
would recommend that people stay with coins that are recognized in terms of mintage, so that nobody wants to assay it. It's just acceptable. I mean, like if you get bags of old silver coins, you can go in and trade a dime and buy your groceries for the week.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you need some small change to function, but the basic wealth storage, I'd keep in gold.
Okay. Okay. So you're saying it would be, I was in Nicaragua for a couple of months earlier, like a month ago, and I stopped by a couple of jewelry stores down there, and I found some old 1800s Nicaraguan silver coins. Those would be a lot less valuable in America than a silver eagle or a Canadian maple leaf, correct?
I would imagine so, but again,
And easier to trade.
I'm also talking about you can buy bags of old silver quarters and dimes,
Okay, junk silver, 90%.
junk silver. But you don't need a high premium gold or silver coin. When you get into the barter circumstance, it's a basic metallic value.
Okay.
You can come with a pirate doubloon that's worth $5,000 instead of $2,000 or 10,000 versus.
Okay. Yeah, we're not looking for numismatics. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you, John. This was very informative, a lot of fun. If people want to learn more about you and what you're doing and keeping up the good fight and just doing like we're doing, we're just trying to educate people, and they can go to shadowstats.com, correct?
That is correct. And when you go there, I'm trying to address people a little bit as they get there, but right hand column, it's the latest analysis of whatever's come out of economic reporting or development. Just scroll down. It maybe look like it's a long page. Just keep scrolling down. You get everything that you want there. I publish a commentary, which seems increasingly to become monthly as circumstances become complex. Everything's addressed. The current stuff's all addressed there in the right hand column on the homepage. We get into what's really happening behind the scenes and what to look forward to in the commentaries, and an annual subscription for the commentaries is $175. The scroll down on what's happening day to day, that's anyone who wants to log into the site, which is shadowstats.com.
I can see a daily update, July 22nd to 26th, and then you've just got article after article. I feel like you and guys like Mike Maloney and you're kind of looking over a Monopoly board, and you're watching 5-year-olds play and trying to anticipate what they're going to do, and you're looking at little Jerome, and he rolls a deuce, and you're like, okay, well, that puts him on B&O Railroad. He should buy it. And then he moves the piece 2 pieces backwards, and you guys are like, wow, I didn't think he would do that. Well, what do we try to guess what he's going to do now? Is that about what this is like?
You're dealing with highly intelligent, well-educated people here. The problem is they're what's motivating them and what powers are serving. And I mean, I've got my opinions in that, which we probably touched on to a certain extent here. But what I can tell you is you got to look after your self-interest. And what these guys are looking to do, the banking system's bankrupt. We do not have a good future for us here, either from an economic standpoint or an inflation standpoint. You have assets you want to protect. Buy physical gold, buy physical silver, and hold it, and just forget about it. And as the system rides out, it'll save you over time. That's the best advice I can give you. But buy the coins. You want to have something that's recognizable by people with whom you'd be bartering or trading.
Okay.
Buy something that not just a bar that says so many grams or whatever. Because somebody's going to want to assay that. Which I mean, if no great rush, and you're willing to have it assayed, that's fine. But coins are recognized.
Okay. Okay. My plan is in the future to trade this metal for houses. I hope it works out. We'll see.
You may be able to trade a $20 gold piece for your next mansion.
There you go. That's the dream, sir. Right on. Well, thank you, Mr. Williams. This was a blast. Go to shadowstats.com for more information. And yeah, thank you. To quote the line from Office Space with the two Bobs, the pleasure is all on this side of the table, sir. As a side note, you remember our guest, Jordan Royburn. He came on episode 10. We're going to have him back on. He has a premium service where he analyzes junior gold mining companies. And I signed up for it. And holy God, that man knows how to find junior gold mining companies. He shows you the ideal portfolio, or the I forget what he calls it. It's the main portfolio, and you can see exactly how much he's bet, how many shares, at what time, when he sells. He tells you all this in a weekly update, and he puts out these flash updates that allow you to. If something happens on a Tuesday or Wednesday, he'll throw out a little update so that you know what's going on Thursday morning. I really like this service. It's $149 for 6 months, and well worth it. I made some trades today, Friday, just before the market closed. And a lot of it was based on his recommendations, and you can look back over his history. He has all 735 of his reports there, and you can look back over history and see his entry points, and it's quite intuitive. Another thing I really like about Jordan's system is when we had him on the show, I asked him what his percentage of importance was on fundamentals and what it was on technicals. And he said 50-50. And so fundamentals are things like looking at a company, who's managing it, what are their balance sheets, what's their projections, PE ratios, all that stuff. The fundamentals of the company, does it fundamentally, look like it's going to succeed? And the technicals are reading the graphs and looking at moving averages and RSIs and resistance and supports. And I and Daniel understand the technical side. And so when he recommends a stock, I can look at the graphs and read them. I'm sure he can read them better than me. But after going through Randall's class, I recognize why he's entering these from a technical standpoint. And they're all spot on. I can't speak to the fundamental side. That's why I signed up for his service, is because he's on the phone with guys like Alex Black, who we had on the show, all the time. And he's coming up with, he's analyzing drill holes and doing together calculations. And when you read these reports, it's very impressive. But I can tell you his capability as a technical trader is very, very good. And I'm going to learn a lot. So if you want to check that out, I don't get anything from Jordan, not yet, but go to thedailygold.com and check, just get on his newsletter, and you'll get a few videos or charts and audio content like that. But I think that man is going to be extremely wealthy in the next decade. He already is, but that man knows what he's doing, and I'm not ashamed to ride the coattails of Superman. So anyhow, we got to have him back on. If you're enjoying the show, please rate and review us. Throw up a 5-star review. Hit the little thumbs up icon. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the little bell. Do all those bells and whistles and all that stuff. Put us up towards the top of the list, and let's get the word out. Invest in your own education. Thank you for listening. Thank you for telling a friend, and thank you for tuning in. Here is your weekly motivational speech.
How easy and how convenient is it for us to blame everything and everybody for the things that we have going on in our lives? There is a such thing as you being a positive and a great person with the best of intentions towards everybody. And shit is rough and you just can't get a break. But most of you are waking up every day looking for pain, dysfunction, drama, unemployment, being broke, struggling, dropping every excuse in the book about your childhood and the problems and dysfunction that you grew up in that's stopping you from becoming successful.
The excuses are not valid. They aren't. They're conjured up. They're fabricated. They're lies. They are lies, all of them. You don't have time. That's a lie. You don't have support. That's a lie. You don't have the equipment or the gear. Lies. You don't know the best way. Who cares? That's a lie. And there's, you're too busy. Sure you are.
We have all these new thoughts that come about. You start saying to yourself, I'm so alone. Nobody understands me. Nobody gets me. I'm the only one to ever go through something like this. I'm a mess up. I'm a failure. I'd be better off not being here. Nobody would miss me. I'm all alone right now. Why would anybody care if I was gone? Here I am. I'm just alone. We just keep feeding ourselves this toxic thinking. And literally what I've learned in these moments of anxiety is that I have to stop listening to myself and I have to start talking to myself.
When you're going after your dreams, when you're going after your goals, there will be people, there will be things that you will have to overcome. The battle has just started. That very moment you feel like giving up is when you must think to yourself, why am I doing this? And then you will realize that you can't give up.
It doesn't matter about what happens to you. What matters is, what are you going to do about it?
When you leave, what you fighting for? What's your legacy? What you gonna do? You say you a champ, but do you practice like a champ? You say you a champ, do you fight like a champ? You say you a champ, do you have the mentality of a champ?
You must build a mindset for success. A mindset that can endure pain and struggle, because it will come.
Let me tell you something. My greatest moments didn't come from my greatest moments. My greatest moments came from my greatest defeats. Because it was during my defeat that I had to find a way to get back up.